Zephyr's claws scraped against the metal floor of the detention facility as she paced her cell. The Krillian warrior stood nearly 8 feet tall, her scaled hide bearing the ritual scars of 1,000 battles. Her forearms rippled with muscle that could crush steel, and her reptilian eyes glowed with the fire that had made her the most feared commander in the Galactic Coalition's history. She had conquered 17 star systems. Her name was whispered in terror across 100 worlds. The mere sight of her battle armor had caused entire enemy fleets to surrender without firing a single shot. Zephyr was death incarnate, a living weapon forged in the crucible of endless war. But now she was trapped, captured during a failed mission to infiltrate a human research station. The humans had used some kind of neural disruptor that temporarily paralyzed her nervous system. When she awoke, she found herself in this sterile white cell. Her weapons confiscated, her pride shattered. The cell door hissed open, and Zephyr immediately dropped into a combat stance, all forearms ready to strike. She expected to see armed guards, military personnel, perhaps even torture specialists. Instead, a small human walked in carrying what appeared to be a medical kit. The human was unremarkable by any warrior's standards. Average height for their species, with soft features and gentle brown eyes. No visible weapons, no armor, no threatening posture. The human wore simple civilian clothes and moved with a calm, unhurried pace that puzzled Zephyr. "Hello," the human said quietly. "My name is Dr. Sarah Chen. I'm here to check on your injuries." Zephyr let out a low, threatening growl that had made hardened soldiers flee in terror. "Stay back, soft skin. I may be caged, but I still have claws." Dr. Chen paused but didn't retreat. Instead, she looked directly into Zephyr's eyes with an expression the warrior couldn't quite understand. It wasn't fear, but it wasn't aggression either. "I can see you're hurt," Dr. Chen said, nodding toward a deep gash on Zephyr's left arm that was still bleeding. "That wound needs treatment or it could become infected." "I have endured worse," Zephyr snarled. "I do not need help from a weak human." "Perhaps not," Dr. Chen replied, setting her medical kit down slowly. "But I'd like to help anyway if you'll let me." The words confused Zephyr more than any battle strategy ever had. Let her help? When had anyone ever asked for Zephyr's permission for anything? In her world, power was taken, not given. Strength dominated weakness. Yet this fragile human was asking, not demanding. Why? Zephyr found herself asking, her defensive posture relaxing slightly. Dr. Chen opened her kit and pulled out antiseptic and bandages. "Because you're in pain and I'm a doctor. It's what I do." The simplicity of the answer struck Zephyr like a physical blow. No ulterior motives, no strategic advantages, no displays of dominance. Just help offered freely to someone who needed it. "I am your enemy," Zephyr said, testing the human's resolve. "I have killed thousands of your kind." Dr. Chen's hands paused for just a moment, and Zephyr saw something flicker across her face. Pain perhaps, or sadness. But when she looked up again, her resolve hadn't wavered. "Right now you're just someone who needs medical attention," she said. "May I approach?" Zephyr found herself nodding before she consciously made the decision. Dr. Chen moved closer, her movements slow and non-threatening. When she began cleaning the wound, her touch was gentle but sure. The warrior had been treated by military medics before, but their touch was always clinical, efficient, sometimes rough. Dr. Chen's touch was different. She worked with careful attention as if Zephyr's comfort mattered. "This might sting a little," Dr. Chen warned before applying the antiseptic. No one had ever warned Zephyr about pain before. Pain was expected, endured, ignored. Yet this human thought it worth mentioning, as if Zephyr's feelings were important. As Dr. Chen worked, she spoke quietly about inconsequential things. The weather on this station, a book she was reading, her concern for a colleague who'd been working too hard. She didn't interrogate or threaten or boast. She simply talked as if they were two beings sharing a moment rather than captor and prisoner. When the bandaging was complete, Dr. Chen packed up her kit. "There," she said with satisfaction. "That should heal properly now." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "I'll check on you tomorrow if that's all right." Again, she was asking. Zephyr, who commanded fleets in conquered worlds, found herself unable to speak. She managed a small nod. After Dr. Chen left, Zephyr sat on her cot and stared at the fresh bandage on her arm. The pain had lessened considerably, but something else had awakened in its place. A strange feeling she couldn't identify. Warm and uncomfortable and completely foreign. She had faced down space pirates and war machines, But somehow this gentle human had done something no enemy had ever managed. Dr. Chen had confused her, disarmed her in a way that had nothing to do with weapons or strategy. For the first time in her warrior's life, Zephyr wondered if strength might not be the only measure of power. As she drifted off to sleep, her last thought was of gentle brown eyes and a touch that had healed rather than harmed. Outside her cell, the galaxy continued its endless dance of conflict and conquest. But inside, something new was beginning to grow in the heart of the most feared warrior in known space. Dr. Sarah Chen returned the next day, just as promised. Zephyr had spent the entire night thinking about their encounter, analyzing it like a battle plan that made no strategic sense. She had conquered worlds through fear and force, yet this small human had achieved something far more puzzling with nothing but kindness. When the cell door opened, Zephyr was ready with questions. "Why do you treat me with such care?" "I'm a prisoner of war." Sarah entered with another medical kit and what appeared to be a small tablet device. "How is your arm feeling today?" "Answer my question first," Zephyr demanded, though her tone lacked its usual venom. Sarah paused in her preparations and looked directly at the towering warrior. "Because every living being deserves basic dignity and care. It doesn't matter what you've done or who you are. When someone is hurt, we help them. We?" Zephyr's eyes narrowed. "All humans think this way?" "Many do," Sarah replied, beginning to unwrap the bandage. "Though not all, I suppose. But it's what I believe." The wound had healed remarkably well overnight thanks to Zephyr's advanced physiology. As Sarah applied fresh dressing, she continued talking. "I brought something I thought you might find interesting," she said, indicating the tablet. "It's a collection of human literature. Stories, poetry, philosophy. I thought you might be curious about our culture." Zephyr stared at the device as if it might explode. "You offer entertainment to your prisoners?" "I offer understanding," Sarah corrected. "You've spent your life fighting humans, but do you actually know anything about us? Beyond military tactics and weapon capabilities?" The question struck Zephyr unexpectedly. She knew human battle formations, their ship designs, their standard combat protocols. But culture, art, the things that made them who they were beyond warfare? She realized she knew almost nothing. Why would such knowledge matter in war? Zephyr asked, though her curiosity was clearly piqued. Sarah finished with the bandage and sat cross-legged on the floor, a gesture that brought her to eye level with the seated warrior. The positioning was deliberately non-threatening, Zephyr realized, designed to make their conversation feel more equal. "Maybe it wouldn't change war," Sarah said thoughtfully, "but it might help you understand why we fight so hard to protect what we've built. You fight because you are territorial like all species," Zephyr said, reciting what she'd been taught. "Do we?" Sarah smiled gently. "What if I told you that yesterday while I was treating you, a human colony on the outer rim was evacuating civilians from a natural disaster? They didn't ask about species or allegiance. They saved everyone they could reach." Zephyr's facial scales shifted slightly, a sign of confusion among her people. "That makes no tactical sense. Resources should be preserved for your own kind." "Should they?" Sarah touched the tablet, bringing up an image. It showed humans working alongside several alien species to build what appeared to be a hospital. This was taken last month on New Geneva. Humans, Altarians, even some Krillian refugees working together. Krillians. Zephyr leaned forward despite herself. "Impossible. My people do not work with others." "Some do," Sarah said quietly. "The ones who chose to leave the warrior culture behind. They're building new lives, learning new ways to be strong." The concept was so alien to everything Zephyr had been taught that her mind struggled to process it. Krillians who had abandoned the warrior's path? It was like being told that space had suddenly decided to be solid. "You speak of weakness," Zephyr said, though her conviction wavered. "Do I?" Sarah showed another image. This one of a Krillian working with human children in what looked like a school. "Caleth here was a former commander like yourself. He says teaching the young requires more courage than any battle he ever fought." Zephyr studied the image intently. The Krillian in the picture looked peaceful, content in a way she had never seen in any warrior. His scales had lost the angry red tint of constant combat readiness and had settled into calm blue-green patterns. "How?" she whispered. "How what? How did he find peace?" "Warriors are born for conflict. It is our nature." Sarah leaned back against the wall, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe nature isn't as fixed as we think. Maybe we choose who we want to become. She gestured to the tablet again. There's a human philosopher named Marcus Aurelius who wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." He was a warrior too, in his own way. Philosophy from a warrior? The strongest humans often are philosophers, Sarah explained. They've learned that the greatest battles are the ones we fight within ourselves. Zephyr absorbed this information slowly. In her culture, introspection was considered a luxury that warriors couldn't afford. You fought, you conquered, you moved on to the next battle. But here was Sarah suggesting that the battle within might be more important than any external conflict. "I do not understand your species," Zephyr admitted. "I don't fully understand mine either," Sarah laughed. "But that's part of what makes life interesting, don't you think?" As Sarah prepared to leave, she placed the tablet within Zephyr's reach. "This is yours to explore if you want. No obligation." After Sarah left, Zephyr stared at the tablet for a long time before finally picking it up. The first thing she accessed was the image of the former Krillian commander working with human children. She studied his face, trying to understand the expression she saw there. Then she began to read, starting with the words of the warrior philosopher Sarah had mentioned. "You have power over your mind, not outside events." For the first time in her life, Zephyr began to wonder if true strength might come from something other than the ability to destroy. As she read late into the night cycle, she felt something shifting inside her, like armor being slowly removed after wearing it for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be without it. Outside her cell, the station hummed with activity. But inside, a warrior was beginning to discover that there might be more to existence than endless conflict. 3 days had passed since Sarah first brought Zephyr the tablet. The warrior had consumed the human literature voraciously, her mind hungry for these new perspectives she'd never encountered. Poetry that spoke of love and loss, stories of ordinary people showing extraordinary courage, philosophical texts that challenged everything she thought she knew about strength and purpose. When Sarah arrived for her daily visit, she found Zephyr in an unusual position. The massive warrior was sitting with her back against the wall, the tablet resting on her knees, her expression troubled. "Something wrong with the device?" Sarah asked, setting down her medical supplies. "No," Zephyr replied slowly. "I have been reading about human concepts of love and sacrifice. They confuse me." Sarah settled into her now customary spot on the floor. Over the past few days, their conversations had grown longer and more personal. "What confuses you about them?" Zephyr gestured at the tablet. "There is a story here about a human who gave up her own life to save strangers. She gained nothing from it. No territory, no resources, no strategic advantage. Yet the story treats this as heroic. And you don't see it that way?" The question hung in the air while Zephyr struggled with concepts that had no equivalent in her warrior upbringing. "In my culture, sacrifice is tactical. You sacrifice weaker units to achieve victory. You sacrifice resources to gain greater resources. But this human sacrificed everything for nothing." "Maybe she sacrificed everything for something you can't see," Sarah suggested gently. "Explain." Sarah thought for a moment. What if the greatest victory isn't conquering others but protecting them? What if strength isn't about what you can destroy but what you can preserve? Zephyr's scales shifted to a darker hue, indicating deep contemplation. "I have preserved nothing. I have only taken and destroyed." The admission seemed to surprise her as much as it did Sarah. For a moment, the fierce warrior looked almost vulnerable, a crack appearing in the armor of certainty she'd worn all her life. "Tell me about your first battle," Sarah said quietly. Zephyr's eyes focused on a distant point, seeing through time rather than space. "I was barely adult by Krillian standards. There was a small outpost of miners refusing to pay tribute to our fleet. My commander ordered me to make an example of them." "What did you do?" "What I was trained to do." "I led the assault, killed their defenders, took their resources." Zephyr's voice became quieter. "There were young ones there, families. I told myself it was necessary, that this was the way of strength, but..." Zephyr was silent for a long moment. "One of the mining families had a small garden, flowers and food plants growing together in careful rows. I destroyed it during the attack. But before I did, I saw how beautiful it was, how much care had gone into nurturing each plant." Sarah waited, sensing that this was important. I have never created anything, Zephyr continued, only destroyed. That garden was someone's life work, their art, their love made manifest, and I turned it to ash in moments. Why are you telling me this? Zephyr looked directly at Sarah, and for the first time the human could see pain in those reptilian eyes. Because reading your literature has made me realize something terrible. I am not a warrior. I am not even a person. I am just a weapon that learned to think it was alive. The raw honesty in that statement hit Sarah harder than she'd expected. She'd treated wounded soldiers before, seen the psychological toll of combat. But this was different. This was someone questioning the very foundation of their entire existence. Do you think weapons can choose to become something else? Sarah asked carefully. Can they? There was desperate hope in Zephyr's voice. Instead of answering directly, Sarah pulled up a new file on the tablet. It was a video message. The image showed the same former Krillian commander they'd seen before, but this time he was speaking directly to the camera. My name is Helpless, the Krillian said in accented but clear human speech. Like many of my people, I was raised to be a weapon. I believed that strength meant the ability to take what I wanted, to dominate those weaker than myself. I was wrong. Zephyr leaned forward, fascinated. I learned from humans that true strength comes from choice, the choice to protect instead of destroy, the choice to build instead of tear down, the choice to love instead of fear. Kaleth's scales had shifted to warm golden tones as he spoke. I am still learning what it means to be a person instead of a weapon. Some days it is harder than any battle I ever fought. But some days, when I see a child I've taught learn something new, or when I help someone in need, I understand what humans mean when they talk about joy. The message ended, leaving Zephyr and Sarah in silence. He made a choice, Sarah said finally, but how does one choose? I know only warfare and conquest. I have no other skills, no other purpose. You learned to read human literature in 3 days, Sarah pointed out. You've been asking questions, thinking about philosophy, feeling empathy for people you've never met. Those aren't warrior skills? Zephyr looked down at her hands, studying the claws that had dealt so much death. Perhaps. But even if I could change, why would anyone trust me? Why would anyone help someone who has caused so much harm? Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her medical kit and pulled out a small device Zephyr hadn't seen before. It was a communication pad. My supervisor doesn't know I'm doing this, Sarah said, but I've been in contact with Helpless. He works at a rehabilitation center for former military personnel, all species. He says they can always use people who understand what it's like to feel lost after a life of violence. Zephyr stared at the device as if it might bite her. You would help me contact him? If you want to try, Sarah said simply. But the choice has to be yours. No one can force you to become someone new. You have to want it enough to do the hard work of changing. For the first time since her capture, Zephyr felt something that wasn't anger or contempt or tactical analysis. She felt hope, fragile and frightening and completely foreign. I do not know if I can become the person I wish to be, she said quietly. None of us do, Sarah replied, but maybe that's where courage really begins. As Zephyr reached for the communication device, her hand was trembling slightly. She who had never feared battle or death was terrified of the possibility of redemption. But for Sarah, for the chance to become someone worthy of the gentle kindness she'd been shown, she was willing to try. The communication device felt heavier in Zephyr's hands than any weapon she'd ever wielded. Sarah had shown her how to operate it, explaining that the message would be transmitted across space to the rehabilitation center where Kaleth worked. Now, sitting alone in her cell, Zephyr struggled to find words for a conversation she'd never imagined having. What did one say to a fellow warrior who had found peace? How could she explain the chaos in her mind? The way everything she'd believed about strength and purpose had crumbled in just a few days. Finally, she activated the device and began to record. Kaleth, son of the warrior clans. My name is Zephyr, and I am confused about what I am. She paused, frustrated by her inability to articulate something so fundamental. I have seen your message. The human doctor Sarah Chen believes you might understand what I'm experiencing. She stopped recording and stared at the device. This wasn't how warriors communicated. There was no boasting, no display of strength, no careful positioning for advantage. This was just one broken person reaching out to another. She started again. I have been a weapon for so long that I do not remember being anything else. But in these past days, I have learned that humans possess something we were never taught about. They call it compassion, and somehow through a human's kindness, I have begun to feel empty. Not the emptiness of hunger or need, but the emptiness of realizing that everything I built my existence upon was hollow. The words came easier now, as if speaking this truth aloud was allowing her to understand it herself. The human Sarah treats me as if I have value beyond my capacity for violence. She gives me literature to read, engages me in conversation about concepts I never knew existed, and offers help without expecting anything in return. I do not understand this behavior, but it has awakened something in me that I thought was dead. Zephyr paused the recording and looked around her cell. For the first time, she noticed that Sarah had made small changes during her visits. A soft blanket had appeared on the sleeping platform. The harsh lighting had been adjusted to be less jarring. These tiny gestures of care had accumulated without Zephyr even realizing. I have caused great harm, she continued. I have taken lives, destroyed homes, brought suffering to countless beings. I do not expect forgiveness, nor do I believe I deserve it. But I find myself wondering if it is possible for someone like me to find a different path. She thought about the garden she'd destroyed years ago, how the careful rows of plants had represented someone's love made manifest. Then she thought about Sarah's gentle hands treating her wounds, another form of love made manifest through healing rather than creation. The human Sarah has shown me that strength might mean something entirely different from what we were taught, that protecting might be more powerful than conquering, that choosing mercy might require more courage than choosing violence. These concepts terrify me because they suggest that everything I have done in service of strength was actually weakness. The recording continued for several more minutes as Zephyr poured out thoughts she'd never spoken to anyone. When she finished, she transmitted the message and then settled back to wait, not knowing if Kaleth would even respond. The reply came 6 hours later. Kaleth's image appeared on the screen, and Zephyr was struck again by the peaceful quality of his expression. His scales had the warm, settled patterns of someone who had found his place in the world. Sister Zephyr, he began, using the formal address for fellow warriors. Your words echo my own journey so clearly that it is like hearing my past self speak. The confusion you describe, the sense that everything you knew was wrong, the terror of imagining a different way of being. I remember all of it. He paused, his expression compassionate. You ask if someone like us can find a different path. I am living proof that we can. But I must be honest with you. It is the hardest thing you will ever do. Harder than any battle because this war is fought entirely within yourself. Zephyr found herself leaning forward, hanging on every word. The human who showed you kindness has given you a gift beyond measure, Kaleth continued. They have shown you that you are worthy of care simply by existing. This is a revolutionary concept for people like us who were taught that worth must be earned through violence. His image shifted as he moved closer to the camera. I work now with others who have walked this path. Former soldiers of many species who have chosen to lay down their weapons and pick up tools of healing instead. Some were killers like us. Some were victims of people like us. Together we are learning what it means to build instead of destroy. The idea of working alongside people she might once have harmed made Zephyr's stomach clench with something she was beginning to recognize as guilt. You speak of the harm you have caused, Kaleth said, as if reading her thoughts. Good. Acknowledging the damage we have done is the first step. But dwelling in guilt without action is just another form of selfishness. The question is not whether you deserve forgiveness. The question is what you will do with the rest of your life. He leaned back, and Zephyr could see part of the room behind him. It was filled with art, plants, books, all the things warriors were taught to see as useless. If you choose this path, you will have to learn to live with the weight of your past. There will be days when you remember something you did and the pain will be almost unbearable, but there will also be days when you help someone, when you create something beautiful, when you choose love over fear. Those moments will teach you what redemption really means. Kaleth's expression softened. The human doctor who reached out to me on your behalf spoke highly of you. She said you have been reading philosophy and poetry, that you ask difficult questions and face uncomfortable truths. These are not the actions of a weapon, Zephyr. These are the actions of a person who is learning to think for herself. When the message ended, Zephyr sat in silence for a long time. When Sarah arrived for her evening visit, she found the warrior sitting quietly with the communication device in her lap. Did you reach him? Sarah asked. Zephyr nodded. He says the path I am considering will be the hardest thing I ever do. And? For the first time since her capture, Zephyr smiled. It was a small, uncertain expression, but it transformed her entire face. "I have never backed down from a difficult fight." Sarah smiled back. "No, I don't suppose you have." As they sat together in comfortable silence, both of them understood that something fundamental had shifted. The fierce warrior who had entered this cell was slowly dying, and in her place someone entirely new was beginning to be born. 2 weeks had passed since Zephyr's first conversation with Caliph. During that time, their exchanges had become daily occurrences, with the former commander offering guidance and support as Zephyr grappled with ideas that challenged everything she'd ever known about herself. Sarah's visits had evolved too. What had started as medical checkups had become philosophical discussions, shared meals, and quiet moments of companionship that Zephyr treasured more than any victory she'd ever achieved. She found herself looking forward to the soft sound of Sarah's footsteps in the corridor, the gentle way she announced her presence, the patient way she listened to Zephyr's struggles with concepts like empathy and redemption. But today was different. Today, Sarah entered with Commander Martinez, the human military officer responsible for the detention facility. Zephyr immediately tensed, recognizing the formal nature of the visit. "Zephyr," Commander Martinez began, his voice neutral but not hostile, "your case has been under review by the Interspecies Council. Given Dr. Chen's reports and your recent communications with the Rehabilitation Center, you have been presented with an unusual opportunity." Zephyr looked between the two humans, her newly developed ability to read emotions telling her that Sarah was nervous about something. "What kind of opportunity?" Zephyr asked cautiously. Commander Martinez consulted a data pad. "The Council has agreed to consider a supervised release program. Instead of traditional imprisonment or execution, you would be transferred to the new Harmony Rehabilitation Center under strict monitoring. You would work with former combatants from various species to learn civilian skills and contribute to rebuilding efforts." The words hit Zephyr like a physical blow. She had expected to spend the rest of her life in this cell, had accepted that as the natural consequence of her actions. The possibility of freedom, even restricted freedom, seemed impossible. "There are conditions," the commander continued. "You would submit to neural monitoring to ensure you pose no threat. You would work under constant supervision. Any attempt to escape or cause harm would result in immediate return to military custody for execution. And," he paused, glancing at Sarah, "you would have to formally renounce your allegiance to the Krillian Empire and accept exile from your homeworld. There would be no going back." The weight of that last condition settled over Zephyr like a heavy blanket. Renouncing her people, accepting permanent exile, it meant severing the last ties to everything she had been. It meant choosing to become something entirely new with no safety net to catch her if she failed. "Why?" Zephyr asked. "Why offer this to me?" Commander Martinez looked uncomfortable. "Dr. Chen has been persistent in her advocacy for you. She believes rehabilitation is possible and has staked her professional reputation on that belief. The Council has decided to treat this as a test case for future programs." Sarah stepped forward. "The decision is yours, Zephyr. No one can make it for you." Zephyr studied Sarah's face, looking for any sign of manipulation or hidden agenda, but she saw only the same honest concern that had characterized all their interactions. Sarah genuinely believed in her capacity to change, even when Zephyr herself wasn't certain. "What would I do at this rehabilitation center?" Zephyr asked. "Initially, you would work on basic reconstruction projects," Commander Martinez explained. "Building homes for refugees, tending community gardens, helping with medical supply distribution. Simple tasks designed to teach you how to create rather than destroy." The irony wasn't lost on Zephyr. She who had commanded fleets would be reduced to manual labor. But as she thought about the garden she'd destroyed years ago, the idea of tending growing things seemed less like a demotion and more like an opportunity for healing. "Caliph would be your primary supervisor," Sarah added quietly. "He specifically requested to work with you. And if I refuse this offer?" "Standard military tribunal," Commander Martinez said bluntly. "Given your record, execution is the most likely outcome." The choice was stark: death as the warrior she had always been, or life as someone she had yet to become. But as Zephyr contemplated the alternatives, she realized the choice wasn't really about life or death. It was about who she wanted to be with whatever time she had left. "I need to think," Zephyr said. Commander Martinez nodded. You have 24 hours to decide. After he left, Sarah remained in the cell. She sat in her usual spot on the floor, but her posture was tense. You're worried, Zephyr observed. It was still strange, this ability to read and care about another person's emotional state. I am, Sarah admitted. I've pushed hard for this opportunity, but now I'm wondering if I've put you in an impossible position. How so? Sarah's eyes were troubled. What if you accept and can't adapt? What if the rehabilitation fails and you're worse off than if you'd chosen execution? What if I've been naive about your capacity for change? Zephyr was quiet for a long moment, studying the human who had shown her more kindness than she'd ever received from her own people. You have taught me that worth doesn't have to be earned through violence, she said finally. Perhaps it is time for me to learn if that is true. But what if you can't do it? What if the person you've been is too strong to overcome? Instead of answering directly, Zephyr picked up the tablet and called up a poem Sarah had shared with her days earlier. It was written by a human named Maya Angelou, about the possibility of rising above one's circumstances. This human poet writes about being a phenomenon, Zephyr said, about refusing to let others' expectations define her limitations. She writes about carrying the hopes of those who came before her. She looked directly at Sarah. You have given me hope when I thought hope was impossible. You have seen something in me that I could not see in myself. If I choose life, it will not be because I believe I can change. It will be because you believed I could, and I cannot bear to prove your faith wrong. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. That's not a good enough reason, Zephyr. You have to want this for yourself. Zephyr considered this carefully. Perhaps wanting something starts with someone else believing you deserve it. Perhaps that is how all change begins. She stood and paced to the small window in her cell, looking out at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there was a rehabilitation center where former weapons were learning to be people. Somewhere out there was Colette, who had walked this path before her. I have been thinking about that garden I destroyed, she said quietly. What if, instead of destroying one garden, I could help plant 100? What if the strength I used to take could be redirected to give? She turned back to Sarah. I want to try. Not because I believe I will succeed, but because the alternative is to let all the harm I've caused be the final word on my existence. I want the chance to write a different ending. Sarah smiled through her tears. Then we'll do it together, one day at a time. As they sat together in the quiet of the cell, both of them understood that tomorrow would bring the official decision. But tonight, for the first time in her life, Zephyr fell asleep thinking about growth rather than destruction, about the possibility of becoming someone worthy of the faith that had been placed in her. The transport ship carrying Zephyr to New Harmony felt impossibly small after years of commanding massive warships. She sat in restraints designed for her safety as much as others, watching through a porthole as they approached the rehabilitation center. Below them spread a world unlike anything she'd ever seen. Green spaces interrupted by modest buildings, gardens flowing naturally into living areas, beings of multiple species working together without apparent hierarchy or conflict. Sarah sat beside her, having requested permission to accompany Zephyr during the transition period. Her presence was both comforting and nerve-wracking. Zephyr had grown to depend on Sarah's steady support, but now she wondered if she could function without it. It looks peaceful, Sarah observed, following Zephyr's gaze. It looks vulnerable, Zephyr replied automatically, then caught herself. I apologize. Military thinking is difficult to turn off. Don't apologize for who you've been, Sarah said gently. Just remember that you're choosing who to become. The transport settled onto a landing pad surrounded by flowering trees. Through the airlock window, Zephyr could see a small group waiting to meet them. Colette stood at the front, his scales showing the warm golden tones she'd seen in their video conversations. Beside him were humans, Altarians, and several other species she recognized from battles past. For a moment, panic seized her. These people were potential victims, not allies. Her instincts screamed warnings about exposure and vulnerability. But then she remembered Sarah's teachings about choosing her responses rather than being controlled by them. The airlock opened and Colette approached first. Up close, he was smaller than Zephyr remembered from their battlefield encounters years ago. But there was a solidity to his presence that spoke of inner strength rather than physical dominance. Sister Zephyr, he said, using the traditional greeting, but with none of the warrior's edge she expected. Welcome to New Harmony, Brother Colette, she replied carefully. I am uncertain how to proceed. He smiled, and she realized she'd never seen a Krillian smile with genuine warmth before. Uncertainty is the beginning of wisdom. Come, let me show you where you'll be staying. The living quarters were simple but comfortable, a small room with a bed, desk, and shelves for personal belongings. Through the window she could see a garden where humans and aliens worked side by side, their hands gentle with the growing plants. You'll work with me initially, Caliph explained. We start with basic tasks, food preparation, garden maintenance, equipment repair. Simple work that teaches patience and care. Zephyr nodded, though the idea of performing such menial tasks felt strange. What is expected of me? Learn, Caliph said simply. Learn to value preservation over destruction. Learn to find satisfaction in small accomplishments rather than grand victories. Learn that your worth isn't measured by your capacity to dominate others. That first week was the most difficult of Zephyr's life. Her hands, trained for weapon work, fumbled with gardening tools. Her mind, accustomed to strategic thinking, struggled to focus on the simple task of planting seeds. Everything felt wrong, inefficient, purposeless. But Sarah visited daily during her off-duty hours, and her presence helped anchor Zephyr when the frustration became overwhelming. I do not understand the purpose of this, Zephyr said one evening as they walked through the rehabilitation center's main garden. Around them, former soldiers of various species tended plants with quiet concentration. What don't you understand? Sarah asked. These seeds. Zephyr gestured to a freshly planted section. They are so small, so fragile. Many will fail to grow. The effort seems wasted. Sarah knelt and picked up a handful of soil, letting it run through her fingers. But some will grow. And those that do will feed people, provide beauty, create oxygen. Each seed is a possibility. But the failure rate isn't the point, Sarah finished. The point is caring for each possibility as if it were precious. Because it is. The words echoed something Caliph had said about viewing each day of rehabilitation as a precious possibility. Slowly, Zephyr began to understand that the gardening wasn't really about plants. It was about learning to nurture potential rather than crush it. By the second week, her hands had grown steadier with the tools. By the third, she found herself looking forward to checking on seedlings she'd planted. By the fourth, she experienced her first moment of pure joy when a tiny green shoot emerged from soil. She'd prepared. I think I understand. Now, she told Caliph as they worked side by side in the greenhouse. Understanding what? Why you left the warrior's path. This is harder than battle. Caliph paused in his work with the nutrient solutions. How so? In battle, you can force outcomes through strength and will. Here you must be patient, gentle, accepting that some things will fail despite your best efforts. You must trust in processes you cannot control. And Zephyr carefully transplanted a seedling that had outgrown its starter pot. And it requires faith. Faith that growth is possible, that small actions can lead to meaningful results, that caring for something fragile is worthwhile even if it might not survive. She paused, struck by her own words. I am learning to have faith in myself the same way I have faith in these plants. Not because I know I will succeed, but because the attempt itself has value. That evening, Sarah found her in the garden as the sun set, still working with her plants. You look different, Sarah observed. Zephyr straightened and looked at her hands. They were dirty from soil, stained with plant nutrients marked by small scratches from thorns. But they were gentle now, careful in their movements. I feel different, Zephyr admitted. When I first came here, I thought this work was beneath me. Now I think perhaps everything I did before was beneath this. What do you mean? Zephyr gestured to the garden around them, where dozens of former warriors tended plants with quiet dedication. Look at what we're creating here. Food to nourish, beauty to inspire, spaces where people can find peace. When I was a warrior, I told myself I was serving a higher purpose, but I was serving only destruction. She touched a flower bloom with one finger, marveling at its delicate structure. This flower will last only a few days, but in those days it will feed pollinators, create seeds for future growth, and bring joy to anyone who sees it. Its brief existence serves life itself, Sarah smiled. And what about your existence now? Now? Zephyr considered the question seriously. Now I hope to serve life as well. To be brief perhaps, but meaningful while I last. As they walked back toward the residential buildings, Zephyr realized that for the first time in her adult life, she was looking forward to tomorrow. Not because of battles to be fought or victories to be won, but because of small acts of care to be performed and growth to be nurtured. Behind them, the garden settled into peaceful twilight, watched over by former weapons who had learned to become gardeners of possibility.